Hello, JT Wheatley here again, your humble host and narrator of the History of Comic Books podcast, and today we'll be getting into Jack the King Kirby. Jack Kirby was born Jacob Kurtzberg on August 18, 1917, to Rose and Benjamin Kurtzberg on Essex Street in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, with his younger brother David following 2 years later. Reportedly, his father insulted a German aristocrat who challenged him to a duel, and thus he fled to America, where he worked at a garment factory while the young Jacob sold papers. Like many young boys at the time, he loved pulps and movies, but growing up on the Lower East Side, he soon found himself in the Suffolk Street Gang. Later, he joined the Boy Brotherhood Republic, which had his own paper, the BBR Reporter, that featured his first published work that has sadly been lost to history. However, it was apparently enough for the young Jacob, who, like many young teenagers at the time, to drop out of high school shy of his 12th grade to support his family as an artist. He tried to enroll in the famed Pratt Institute for Art, for training, but his father lost his job. Thus, Jack Kirby, arguably the greatest artist in the comic book history, would never have any formal training. He did get work in spring of 1935 at Mac Fleischer's animation studio, Opaking Cells, soon advancing to cleanup work and then assistant animator. However, the low pay and lack of creative control made him choose a new path. He then joined H.T. Elmo's Lincoln Feature Syndicate under the name Jack Curtis, the first of many pseudonyms, a job that had less pay but the promise of more lucrative bonuses. He made strips like Last from the Day's News and Your Health First, which would feature his first professional reproductions. He would continue to use aliases such as Bob Brown with his strips like The Black Buccaneer, Cyclone Burke, and Socko the Sea Dog. Kirby loved the diversity of the work, particularly in being able to do political cartoons against Adolf Hitler, a frequent target of Kirby's wrath. Now, like many artists, Kirby used pseudonyms not only because he felt his Jewish name of Kurtzberg would discourage him from being hired, but also so he could do more work, since as he was quickly becoming one of the fastest artists in the medium. Oftentimes, one magazine would hire him to do all the strips, but to make it look like they had more than one artist on payroll, they just have him use different pseudonyms. By 1938, he was doing work for the famed Will Eisner studio, Eisner and Iger, whose The Spirit Kirby would call the best comic book of the 1940s and envied its creator, Will Eisner. It also resulted in a classic tale about Kirby, who, when a bill collector came calling to the Eisner studio after repeatedly hiking the rates, Eisner said he couldn't pay, not knowing this man was actually connected to the mob. Kirby saw this and decided to intervene, and despite the collector having a clear foot on the then 5' 3" Kirby, he stood his ground. The man asked Will if he needed him. Jack Kirby asked him if Will Eisner needed him to beat the guy up, and Will said no. And when the collector asked who he was, Eisner replied, "He's our best artist, so if anything happens to him, you definitely won't get your money." The collector relented and left, and Kirby returned to work, but not after telling Will Eisner, "Let me know if he shows up again, and I'll beat him up for you." The bill wasn't raised for months afterwards. Kirby continued to work on various strips at the studio in what he considers his first comic book work, such as The Diary of Dr. Haywood, Wilton of the West, and The Count of Monte Cristo, for which, of course, he used all assumed names. One in particular was Lance Kirby, which he used for The Lightning and the Lone Rider, frankly, excuse the pun, but a Lone Ranger ripoff. Later, Kirby went to work for Victor Fox at the Fox Feature Syndicate, where he got to draw his first superhero, the Blue Beetle, granted a much different version than the DC one we know today. Around the same time, Fox hired Joe Simon as editor, who instantly liked Kirby, who was also moonlighting at Tim Publishing with the Solar Legion comic book strip. Joe Simon did the same for Novelty Press, and soon the two would team up on The Blue Bolt by Joe Simon and Jack Kirby, which would be his final artist name and the one we all know him as today. A name that he claimed sounded like a comic book artist. I can't argue, and no one else did either. By this time, Jack Kirby had gained a reputation not only being one of the best artists in the business, but also one of the fastest. His partnership with Joe Simon was beneficial as well, since Joe was a better businessman who understood how to write a contract. He would later leave Fox to work as a freelancer and wanted Kirby to join him, but Kirby was afraid of working without a regular salary. However, when Martin Goodman at Timely hired Joe to be editor-in-chief, he turned around and hired Kirby at a regular salary. Together, the two produced Daring Mystery Comics and Red Raven, which both flopped. However, the backstory of Red Raven featured a tale of a Greek god Mercury walking the earth, a theme Kirby would revisit throughout his entire career. They also worked at Fawcett Publishing and what was then Captain Marvel. Then, on December 20th, 1940, the cover is dated March 1941, something common in comics to this day, their greatest creation, Captain America, was published, with Cap punching out Hitler on the cover. While an exciting book, it was also very much a call to arms by two young Jewish boys in fear of the Third Reich, and it's no coincidence that Steve Rogers is the very vision of the supposed Aryan race at being blonde-haired and blue-eyed, an irony Simon and Kirby no doubt loved. The comic made them famous, but did receive hate mail and death threats, as this was still when the U.S. was not in the war. They also ran into trouble with Martin Goodman, who hid the profits with Hollywood accounting and how much the comic was making, and left timely after 10 issues on Captain America. Goodman then turned around and hired a young 17-year-old assistant, Stanley Lieber, to take over, and he would become the regular writer on nearly every comic book at the Timely. By the time Kirby would return to work for Goodman, he would be the new editor-in-chief, then known as Stan Lee. On May 23, 1942, Jack Kirby married Rosalind Goldstein, who he would stay married to until his death and have 4 children, being his ever-loving partner. He also went to work for DC, where he and Joe Simon created the Newsboy Legion and Star-Spangled Comics, and The Guardian, another shield-bearing hero. However, it wasn't long before World War II came calling for the creators of Captain America, and Joe Simon enlisted in the Coast Guard in 1943, spending most of his time with the Combat Air Corps in D.C. While on June 21, 1943, Jack Kirby reported for duty at Camp Stewart near Atlanta, Georgia. The Army originally tried to make him a mechanic, which was hilarious, since like many native New Yorkers even to this day, Kirby didn't know how to drive. So he finally made him a rifleman, or as Kirby stated, "I was given an M1 rifle, sent to Europe, and told to kill Hitler," something that Kirby no doubt wanted and minded. On August 17, 1944, he joined Company F of the 11th Infantry under General George Patton and landed on Omaha Beach on August 23rd. He would eventually serve in the Battle of Bastogne and suffer frostbite so badly he nearly lost both his legs. On January 1945, he was reassigned to Camp Butner in North Carolina, and 6 months later was honorably discharged as a private first class with a combat infantry ribbon and a European, African, Middle Eastern theater ribbon with a Bronze Star. Like many veterans, his time in the war would affect him for the rest of his life, and his wife, Roz, told him many times he woke up from nightmares. Returning back to the comic book industry, Simon and Kirby tried a new comic, Stuntman, with an old friend, Cap Al Harvey, before following the new trend of the late 1940s with crime comics with Headline Comics, and others like The Real Crew Crime and Justice Traps The Guilty. Then they started the trend with My Drake, the first romance comic published, which failed but was immediately followed by Young Romance, which was a smash success. Yes, the people that made Captain America also created the romance genre in comic books. Soon, they had a partnership with Price Crestwood and began producing series like Young Love, Real Rest Romance, and Western Love. And by 1950, they even tried their hand at horror with Black Magic, but that was one genre Nick Kirby could never get a grasp of, along with Boys Lance for Al Harvey, and later Strange World of Dreams. They even tried 3D with Cap 3D, but that fad quickly faded. By 1954, they were producing The Fighting American for Prize, who had employed the then unknown Steve Ditko, and then Simon and Kirby tried to launch their own company with Mainline Comics, with titles like In Love, Police Trap, Foxhole, and Bullseye. However, when the CCA was formed that same year, and they volunteered to join, but the company still failed, arranging for Charlton Pless to take over the books. Joe Simon took an editing job for Al Harvey and would send occasional work to Kirby, but it sadly meant the end of their classic partnership. Kirby set out on his own and tried various jobs, but without Joe Simon, his lack of business skills meant he was always taken advantage of. Plus, Kirby refused to participate in the practice of giving kickbacks to editors, i.e., he would return part of his pay in return for jobs. As a result, he was shut out of many publishing houses. Desperate, he went back to work for Timely Marvel and produced the comic Yellow Claw, which was quickly canceled. Then Marvel lost its distributor Atlas and was forced to cut a deal with DC's own distributor, Independent, on the condition they only produce 8 comics a month. As a result, Kirby soon found himself out of work again, and this time went to work at DC, where he created Challengers of the Unknown. The editors, however, limited his creativity, wanted his art to look sharp and clean, and as Joe Kane would put it, take away everything that made Kirby great. But the book managed to still be a success, and even went bi-monthly, though Kirby's name never appeared in any comic he produced. This did lead to more work, such as the Green Arrow and even Ghost and Mystery comics. Frustrated at DC, though, Kirby then tried to do a comic strip with Harvey L. Mark and Dave Wood called The Sky Masters, but made little money, and when Joe Shift, his editor on Challengers, demanded a cut for arranging the deal, Kirby refused. As a result, he was fired from DC entirely and sued by Shift for breach of contract, which he lost. In dire financial straits, both Stan Lee, now editor-in-chief at Marvel, and Joe Simon came calling with work, whom he did the Adventures of the Fly and the Double Life of Private Strong, but they only lasted 2 issues apiece. Soon, the only work Kirby could get was at Marvel, where he was soon drawing everything, including the teen books, while Stan Lee was writing everything, thus deciding the third great partnership in Kirby's life, the first being Joe Simon, the second and most important, of course, being with his wife Roz. It was here that the Marvel method was crafted, in which Stan Lee would provide an outline for Kirby and other artists, the artist would draw the story, and then Lee would come back in and insert the dialogue where it was needed. It was a method that allowed Lee the ability to work on numerous books while giving artists enormous creative freedom, as they essentially designed the look of the characters and the setting. Plus, inserting the dialogue to flow with the finished arc gave a better flow for the action in general. However, it would lead to some controversy, as the dialogue Lee would use sometimes clashed with what artists conceived, as it would with Kirby over the Silver Surfer, and even led to accusations that Lee didn't contribute to the creation of many of his characters. Nevertheless, it was a system that worked at the time, and it would lay the foundation for what was to come. By 1960, they were producing westerns like The Rawhide Kid and The Two-Gun Kid, but Marvel's owner, Martin Goodman, would cancel them before the sales could pick up. Finally, Stan Lee, frustrated by this, got with Kirby to make a comic that would get him fired, called The Fantastic Four. Instead, when it was published in November 1961, it would cement his place at Marvel forever and change the company. Much of Kirby's influence is seen in the book as well, particularly the Thing, Ben Grimm, who many others, including Kirby himself, said the gruff, no-nonsense Thing was essentially his personality. As an added bonus, Ben Grimm is Jewish. So, if any fan who never had the pleasure of meeting Jack Kirby and wanted to know what he was like, just read those early Fantastic Four comics, as apparently Ben Grimm is him. Soon, Lee and Kirby would produce The Incredible Hulk on May 1962, and then Hank Pym Ant-Man and Tales of Astonis number 35 on September 1962. Goodman would cancel after 6 issues, but bring it back once again once the sales numbers finally came in. Soon, Goodman was warming to the superhero comics again, especially once the money started flowing. And Lee and Kirby would create Thor and Journey into Mystery number 83 on August of 1963. Lee would try to Kirby to work on a new character called the Spider-Man, who initially he rejected it because he said it sounded too much like the Fly he worked with Joe Simon. However, the idea stayed with Stan Lee, and he continued to rework it, particularly in making him a teenager, Peter Parker, and soon they started to work together again. Though Kirby could never draw him like Lee wanted, thus he turned to Steve Ditko, who finally crafted the Spider-Man we know and love today. He would debut on the final issue of Amazing Fantasy number 15 on August 1962, though that classic cover of Spider-Man swinging through the city with a criminal in his tow was Kirby, a bone Lee threw to him. As a result, while it was Lee and Ditko that made Marvel's flagship character, Jack Kirby did help up a little bit with that one too. Lee and Kirby did work together again on Tales of Suspense number 39 on March 1963, where they created my personal favorite comic book character, Iron Man. Thank you again, good sirs. And then Sergeant Fury and the Howling Commandos on May of 1963. Then, at the request of Martin Goodman, who wanted Marvel's version of the Justice League, Earth's mightiest heroes were finally assembled in Avengers on September 1963. Of note, by issue number 4, Jack Kirby got to bring back his classic superhero, Captain America, along with Bill Everett's Submariner in issue number 3. Also, on September 1963, the X-Men debuted by Lee and Kirby. My goodness, they were busy. It was around this time that the friction between Stan Lee and Jack Kirby began, as with the media noticing Marvel and wanting to know the creators behind it. Stan Lee became an instant star. Much of this is not Lee's fault, as the man, even to this day, is a natural media star, while Kirby was, well, not. Lee did mention and praise his artist numerous times, but more often the media just ignored him and even erroneously credited him with creating Captain America. In one instant, the New York Herald Tribune ran an article depicting Lee as a creative genius and Kirby as the buffoon who took dictation, though Lee once again praised Kirby and made sure he was in the interviews. However, Kirby's wife Roz called him the next morning, waking him up and demanding he do something about it. Lee did give to Kirby during this time, his nickname, the King of Comics. Reportedly, Lee, ever the media genius, came up with the idea of having the credits of their comic books be Stan the Man Lee, Lee's now classic nickname itself, and Jack the King Kirby. Bill Everett, the creator of Submariner and now Marvel's Daredevil, which he created with Lee, with Kirby contributing to the covers, was present at this meeting, and Kirby insisted that Bill was the king of comics. However, Everett protested, insisting, Jack, everyone knows you are the king of comics. Jack didn't argue, and neither has the rest of the world. Thus, the Jack the King Kirby became his name. This didn't stop Kirby's frustrations, though, as he always fretted over pay and seemed to work himself to death, something that greatly worried his wife Roz. Even worse, one of his eyes was starting to fail, a truly scary notion for an artist, but he kept it secret. And a bit of irony, when Kirby suggested reworking Sergeant Fury into Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., Stan Lee suggested he now be depicted with an eye patch. Strange things happen. On April 1967, arguably the greatest story Lee and Kirby ever produced, in Fantastic Four number 49 came out, which debuted not only the classic villain of the Galactus, but also the new hero, the Silver Surfer. However, they soon argued over the Silver Surfer's origin, as Kirby conceived him as a sentient being of pure energy, while Lee conceived the idea of him being an alien Norrin Rad, which was depicted in the Silver Surfer series he did with John Buscema. Despite these frustrations, Kirby continued to work at Marvel, but it soon came to a head when Martin Goodman sold the company in early 1969 to Perfect Film and Chemical Corporation. To make matters worse, Perfect insisted that Stan Lee be signed to a 3-year contract before buying, believing he was essential to the company, but made no overages to Kirby, who in early 1969 had moved to Hollywood with his family, mainly to help with his daughter Lisa's asthma. Hearing of this frustration, Carmen Infantino, a manager at DC, set out to recruit Kirby, and when Marvel offered Kirby a horrible contract in return, he made the jump. Soon, the comic book world would shake. Reportedly, Jack Kirby said to DC, "Give me your lowest-selling book, and I'll make it your highest-selling one." He was given Superman's pal, Jimmy Olsen, and while not DC's lowest-selling book at the time, he did bring the sales up, which cleared him to really try something new. In 1971 and 1972, he created The New Gods, The Forever People, and Mr. Miracle, which introduced the worlds of New Genesis and Apocalypse, along with the hero Orion and his villainous father Darkseid, all part of the fourth world of DC. Also of note is Big Barda, Mr. Miracle's wife, who was physically modeled after a Playboy layout of singer Lana Kazan, but her personality and strength was every bit his wife Roz. So, if the Thing is Jack and Big Barda is Roz, have fun with that fans fiction, listeners. While not successful, it was these books that would later reshape DC, with Darkseid becoming one of the line's most significant villains. It also strikes similarities with Star Wars, which featured a hero battling his villainous, dark-clad father. The resemblance to Darkseid to Darth Vader is striking, both rechanneled the Source, all before 1977. Of course, this in no way implies that George Lucas ripped off Kirby, as any great artist uses influences from others' works to reform their own. Kirby did it repeatedly with ancient mythology. But seeing Star Wars become an instant blockbuster while the Fourth World originally failed did sting a little. He continued to work at DC with Commandy, The Last Boy on Earth, and The Demon, another attempt at horror, but once again his character was more cartoony than scary. He did work on OMAC in September of 1974, and got to work with Joe Simon again on The Sandman, and The Dingbats of Danger Street on September of 1975. The work he most enjoyed was The Losers, which brought back his time in the service, who, like many veterans, despite the nightmares, still had fondness of that time. With his contract with DC ending in 1975, he returned to Marvel with The Eternals, another epic that introduced the Eternals and the Celestials, giant super beings who apparently helped shape the Marvel Universe. He even did what was considered impossible in 1976 and made a comic book adaptation of 2001, A Space Odyssey. Many considered that one of the worst jobs ever and no one can do it, but Jack Kirby apparently said, "Hold my beer," and managed to astound, as usual. He also worked on Captain America in 1976 and The Machine Man in April of 1978, who originally came out of 2001 number 8. He also gave Black Panther his first original series, who he created with Stan Lee back in Fantastic Four number 52 on July of 1966, and with his own series in 1977. Unfortunately, All of these series suffered low sales, with many fans calling him Jack the Hack now, as they thought his time has long passed. Thankfully, the animation world came calling with Hanna-Barbera, a godsend with his failing eyesight, since animation cells are larger and thus easier to draw. He even worked with Stan Lee again on the Fantastic Four animated series with Gillette Freelong Studio, while still producing comics like The Silver Surfer, The Ultimate Cosmic Experience graphic novel in September of 1978, considered one of the first true graphic novels, along with creating Devil Dinosaur in April of 1978. Back at Hanna-Barbera, he did character design work for Thundarr the Barbarian on 1980 to 1981, and the Ruby Spears production company loved him so much they kept him on retainer for the rest of his professional life. As a result, he would become an animation producer and was able to join the Animation Union, which provided him with health benefits. Also, this resulted in a startling event in late 1978, in that there was no current work by Jack Kirby on the comic book stands, something that hadn't happened in decades. Of course, that wouldn't last long. Of interesting note is a strange event in Kirby's professional life, and that how he was indirectly involved in the Iranian hostage crisis of 1980. In 1979, Roger Zelazny's classic sci-fi novel, The Lord of Light, was announced to be made into a $50 million movie following the success of Star Wars, and Kirby was contracted to do the art for set designs. The picture ultimately fell through, but the CIA acquired the script and Kirby's art to use for the Canadian Caper, in which their top exfiltration agent, Tony Menendez, snuck 6 U.S. diplomats out of Iran under the cover of working for a film crew, and the picture they claimed to be working on was Argo, which will be depicted in the Oscar-winning 2012 film Argo. As part of the cover was the screenplay and the artwork that Kirby used for the film. So, on top of everything else, Kirby's art helped free American hostages. Name another comic book artist who did that. In the 1980s, Pacific Comics was formed and did something novel, offering creators copyrights, royalties, and creative control. This naturally attracted several artists, including Jack Kirby, who published Captain Victory and the Galactic Rangers on November 1981, and Silver Star in February of 1983. He also began publishing Destroyer Duck for Eclipse, partly to support Steve Gerber, who was in a creative dispute with Marvel over his creation Howard the Duck. Then DC sent something that most likely truly shocked, but pleased Kirby, a royalty check. Under the new management of Jeanette Kahn and Paul Levitz, they decided to begin providing royalties and profit percentage to creators on their work, partly to attract top talent, but also as a longtime fans themselves to see some justice done to these creators. They also saw the potential of licensing and merchandising these comic book characters, which they did with Kirby's New Gods, thus the royalty check. Kirby also made an attempt at an original comic with Hunger Dogs, but that also flopped. Around this time, Kirby got into a dispute with Marvel, like many artists, over the return of his original artwork. Marvel reportedly offered to give it to him, but on the condition that he signed a contract relinquishing his creative rights, which also worried him as he thought they would erase his name as the creator of all his comics. Many in the industry rallied around Kirby, though Stan Lee, ever the Marvel man, tried to stay out of it, and even claimed he couldn't do anything about it. This is a bit dubious, since in 1986, Marvel was sold once again, this time to New World Entertainment, and once again, the sale was contingent on Stan Lee signing a long-term contract. Thus, Lee obviously had some pull with the company, but at the same time, he did feel loyal to it, since he had literally been working at there since he was 17 years old, and the company had been good to him. Thus, he did feel loyal and felt that at the very least he should stay out of it. This, however, produced a backlash against Lee, and thus the rumors started forming that Lee deserved none of the credit for any of the creations, something that personally hurt Stan Lee. I guess this is time to get a bit opinionated on the whole Stan Lee versus Jack Kirby debate. Frankly, I've always found this a bit of column A, column B, in that, yes, Jack Kirby was cheated out of his profits and he was owed, but that doesn't take away from the brilliant work that Stan Lee did as a writer. It's understandable why Stan Lee became a target, since he was essentially the face of Marvel to this day, but he got there by being a brilliant writer and comic book creator in his own right. In fact, it was with Kirby that he made such a good pairing, as Kirby, whether it be Fantastic Four or the New Gods, was a brilliant conceiving the fantastic, while Lee, with his snappy dialogue and personal details, brought them down to earth, whether making the Fantastic Four a dysfunctional family or Spider-Man a moody teenager. You see this in New Gods, that while exciting stories, the characters come off as two-dimensional with stiff dialogue. While at the same time, it's doubtful that even Lee could have imagined the brilliant imagery that Kirby drew in those comics. Thus, Jack Kirby emphasized the super, while Lee emphasized the human. And together, they made some of the most fantastic superhuman tales ever conceived. Thus, both of them were great creators, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. Eventually, Marvel did give Kirby his 2,100 pages of artwork back without conditions, which he used as a retirement package for his family, and also made additional money licensing his name and characters to Topps Comics. Jack Kirby did enjoy something of a retirement on the convention circuit, something that he predicted in 1970 at San Diego, which he said would become huge. He even had his first major comic awards named after him with the Kirby Awards from 1985 to 1987, in which he personally presented them at the San Diego Comic-Con every year. They were sponsored by Amazing Stories magazine, but in 1987, a dispute between David Olbrich and his publisher, Fantagraphics, over ownership of the awards was settled, with the awards being split, with Olbrich getting the Eisners, named after Will Eisner, and Fantagraphics getting the Harveys, named after Harvey Kurtzman. The Hall of Fame award would still be named after Jack Kirby until 2001. Then on February 6, 1994, Jack Kirby died of a heart attack at the age of 77. Half the industry turned out for his funeral, including Stan Lee, who quietly sat at the back of the church to not take too much attention, but to still pay tribute to his old colleague. Reportedly, Roz wanted to find him and give him a hug, saying all was forgiven, but Lee had left before she could. Roz would live on for another 4 years to see Marvel finally grant her a pension in 1995, and she vowed she would live to get every penny they were owed, but then she passed away in 1998. They would never live to see Kirby's creations grace the big screen and soon dominate it as it did in the 2000s, but on September 2009, their children sued Disney and Marvel to copyright ownership of his creations. Of interesting note, the lawsuit only claimed half ownership of the creations, with 1/3 for Spider-Man. He did help create him in the beginning, after all. Thus, even though they were acknowledging it directly, they were at least indirectly stating that yes, Stan Lee did help out on those classic characters. However, the U.S. District Court ruled in favor of Marvel in July 2011 and was affirmed by the U.S. Second Circuit Court of Appeals in August of 2013. On March 21st, 2014, they petitioned the U.S. Supreme Court, but on September 26, 2014, they settled with Disney Marvel, though stated they reserved their rights for future lawsuits. And thus, that is the life and work of Jack Kirby, still remembered as one of the greatest artists and storytellers the medium has ever seen. So much so that on his birthday, August 18th, the comic book fans and artists celebrate Jack Kirby Day and are encouraged to draw. His work is still remembered to this day and continues to entertain us, and as the current Marvel readers do so. So as a comic book fan, thank you, Jack Kirby, who has since departed for the great cosmic beyond, but probably thinking he could have drawn it better, as he was truly the king of comic books, and there will never be no other like him. I must thank Mark Evener for his brilliant biography, Kirby, the King of Comics, a wonderful coffee table-sized book that is perfect for showing off his brilliant artwork. It was the principal source for this episode and a must-own for any comic book fan. Last checked, it is currently in stock at Amazon, but just buy it anywhere you can. You have to do this collection for yourself.
My name is Mark McRae, and I'm the author of The Best Saturdays of Our Lives.
I'm Dan Klink, co-host of The Best Saturdays of Our Lives podcast.
The Best Saturdays of Our Lives features programming trends from the 1966 television season all the way through the last hurrah of the early digital age of the 1990s.
On the show, if it's animated, we talk about it.
Order your signed copy today at tbsool.com.
And listen to the podcast at esonetwork.com and all podcast platforms.
And now it is August 29th, 2024. Time for the favorite comic of the week. NYX, number 2 by Jackson Lindsay and Colin Kelly with art by Francesco Martorino, which is a great second issue that follows up this loose new team of young mutants now living in New York City after the fall of Krakoa, this time focusing on Laura Kinney Wolverine, the daughter of Logan, the original Wolverine, as she's tracking down what's happening to a bunch of young mutants being what she thinks is kidnapped, only to find a much larger conspiracy, and that maybe she shouldn't work on her own anymore. This is a great issue that actually a lot of fans were worried about how Laura Kane's going to be treated in this. As she didn't really give a great showcase during the Krakoa era outside of the brilliant Exterminators series, which if you haven't read that miniseries, check it out. Some of the most fun, easily one of the most fun miniseries that come out of the Krakoa era, and she's fantastic in it. But in this one, you really get to see her grow and evolve, and shows that she's not just a female Wolverine Logan. She is her own character with her own faults and weaknesses. And it's great and she has a great turning point at the end. It shows, oh yeah, this is a Laura Kinney we've been missing for a long time, arguably back since the great all new Wolverine written by Tom Taylor that really set the standard for the character. And it's matched by Francesco Martino's art, which is absolutely gorgeous. There's a great version of Laura, and thankfully she only appears in that atrocious, weird jacketed costume once. The rest of the time she's in a normal civilian attire and looks great, and just a great run in general. And the NYX looks to be one of the more unique X-Men books coming out of the Fall of X, and so far it's been really great, and this issue is no exception. And of course, we have to bring up a belated happy Jack Kirby Day, the King of Comics, which is we celebrate every year on August 28th. It's the 29th, but I wanted to bring out this archive episode of Jack Kirby for everyone to enjoy. And easily the King of Comics, arguably the most influential artist in all of comic book history. He really set the standard to this day. And definitely go back and read that great biography by Mark Evner too, which is great large format, great showcase of his art, and even some concepts for early Thor and so forth. The man was a genius. And, definitely worth checking out. And with that, we will conclude with this episode of The Archives. Join me again next week for another episode. And until then, go and enjoy yourself a good comic book. And being Jack Kirby Day, I would definitely say go check out NYX, but also check out some of Jack Kirby's old classic works. There's too many to count. But the man was a genius. Definitely worth respecting.